When I pulled into the driveway with a $10,000 check resting on the passenger seat, I expected balloons. I expected the smell of barbecue, the loud laughter of teenagers, and the proud smile of my grandson Tyler in his graduation cap. Instead, I found a driveway empty of cars and a house so quiet it felt like a tomb. My stomach tightened. I pulled out my phone and dialed my son Jason. He answered on the fourth ring. When I asked him where everyone was for the graduation party, the line went dead silent. Then, in a cold voice, he said, "Dad, the party was last month." "I thought you knew." I did not know it then, but that single chilling sentence was the beginning of a nightmare that would expose a massive web of lies, theft, and a plot to completely destroy my life. If you are watching this, hit the like button and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. You need to hear this story because this could happen to anyone who trusts their family too much. Let me give you the context of that Saturday. I am 75 years old. I spent 40 years of my life as a structural engineer building bridges across this country. I worked 60-hour weeks breathing in concrete dust and standing in the scorching sun just to make sure my family would never have to struggle. When my wife passed away 10 years ago, my son Jason and my grandson Tyler became my entire world. I would have given them my last breath if they asked for it. Over the last 5 years, I handed them $380,000. $200,000 went to the down payment for the very house I was parked in front of. The rest was supposed to cover the expensive private school tuition for Tyler. So when the high school graduation day finally arrived, I was bursting with pride. I had the $10,000 graduation gift tucked neatly into a silver envelope. I ironed my best shirt. I drove across town smiling, ready to celebrate the boy I loved more than life itself. But as I sat in my truck staring at the closed garage doors, that smile slowly faded. The neighborhood was perfectly still. There were no cars parked along the street. There were no congratulatory banners hanging from the front porch. I stepped out of my truck, the gravel crunching loudly beneath my boots. Every step toward the heavy oak front door felt wrong. I pressed the doorbell. The chime echoed hollowly inside the house. I waited. Nothing. I knocked the sound of my knuckles against the wood, seeming entirely too loud. Still nothing. A cold sense of dread began to crawl up my spine. Did I get it wrong? Was I losing my mind? My hands were shaking slightly as I took out my phone and dialed the number of Jason. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Just as I was about to hang up, he answered. The background noise on his end sounded like a television playing softly. "Hey, Dad," he said. His tone was casual, entirely too relaxed for a man whose father was standing on his empty front porch. "Jason," I said, trying to keep the confusion out of my voice. "I am at your house." "Where is everybody?" "Did you guys change the venue for the party?" The silence that followed was suffocating. It stretched on for 10, maybe 15 seconds. I could hear him taking a slow breath. Then came the words that felt like a physical blow to my chest. "Dad," he said, his cracking. "How could it have been last month? I thought you knew." I stood there paralyzed. "Last month," I repeated, my voice cracking. "How could it have been last month? I have the invitation right here. You told me it was the 28th. Jason did not miss a beat. His voice immediately shifted into a smooth, comforting tone, a tone that sounded perfectly reasonable but made my skin crawl. "Dad, listen," he said smoothly. "Tyler had a severe panic attack a few weeks ago. The pressure of final exams and the thought of a huge gathering just broke him. His therapist strongly recommended we cancel the big event and keep things extremely small. Just me, Melanie, and him. We had a quiet dinner instead. I felt a sharp pang of guilt. Tyler had anxiety." Why was this the first I was hearing of it? But Jason was already pivoting, laying down the next layer of his plausible lie. "I sent you a long email explaining everything right after we spoke to the doctor." Jason continued, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. Did you not check your inbox? It probably went to your spam folder. Honestly, Dad, you have been forgetting a lot of things lately. Do not beat yourself up over it. We know you love him. I closed my eyes. The silver envelope in my hand suddenly felt incredibly heavy. My own son was telling me that my grandson was suffering, and my immediate reaction was to blame myself for missing an email. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I am so sorry, Jason, I murmured. Is Tyler okay? Can I at least come in and see him? Jason sighed, a timed sound of regret. He is actually at a weekend retreat for stress management, Dad. We really need to let him rest. Let us catch up next week. I will call you. The line went dead. I stood on that porch for a long time. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. But as I walked back to my truck, a strange, nagging feeling settled deep in my gut. Something was not right. The pieces did not fit together. And that instinct, that gut feeling, was about to blow my world wide open. A whole month dragged by after that empty Saturday. I tried to push the nagging feeling aside. For 40 years, I built physical bridges of steel connecting distant cities across the country. Yet somehow, the most important bridge I had ever built, the one connecting me to my own flesh and blood, was crumbling beneath my feet. Jason did not call me. Every time I reached out to check on Tyler, I was sent straight to voicemail. The silence was deafening, and the knot in my stomach grew tighter. Then came the second Tuesday of the following month. A heavy downpour was washing over the neighborhood. I was sitting in my living room watching the local evening news. The grandfather clock in the hallway had just chimed 9 times. At exactly that moment, a frantic pounding echoed from my front door. It was the desperate, rapid hammering of someone in serious trouble. My heart skipped a beat. I walked slowly to the foyer, peering through the peephole. Standing on my front porch, drenched in rain, was Jason. I unbolted the door and pulled it open. Jason practically shoved his way inside before I could speak. The moment the porch light hit his face, I took a step back in shock. His dress shirt was untucked, wrinkled, and soaked through. But it was not just the rain making him look this way. He was sweating profusely, thick beads of moisture rolling down his pale face despite the chill. His eyes were bloodshot and darting around my hallway. He looked like a cornered animal. Dad. Thank God you are home, he gasped out of breath. I need a massive favor right now. I stood there feeling the cold dampness radiating off his clothes. What is going on, Jason? Why are you banging on my door like a madman at 9 at night? He did not look me in the eye. He paced back and forth across my hardwood floor, leaving muddy footprints. Dad, it is Tyler, he stammered, his voice cracking. Everything is falling apart, and I need you to save him. The mention of my grandson instantly spiked my blood pressure. What happened to Tyler? Is he hurt? I demanded. No, he is fine physically, Jason replied quickly, waving his hands defensively. But his future is about to be ruined. Listen to me carefully, Dad. There was a massive system glitch at the university billing department today. Our bank account was flagged for fraudulent activity, and they froze all our assets. The tuition deposit for Tyler is going to bounce tomorrow morning. If the money does not clear by 8 in the morning, they are going to give his spot to a waitlist student. He will lose his freshman year. I stared at him, trying to process the frantic words. A system glitch. A frozen account. It sounded like the plot of a cheap television show. Okay, I said slowly, trying to maintain my composure. How much do you need to cover this deposit until your bank fixes the error? Jason stopped pacing. He looked directly at me, and I saw a flash of pure desperation in his bloodshot eyes. $35,000, he blurted out. I need $35,000 in cash or wired directly by tomorrow morning. The number hung in the air like a physical weight. $35,000. For a deposit. My mind raced back to the thick ledger sitting in my desk drawer. Jason, I said, my voice hardening. That makes absolutely no sense. I already gave you $180,000 over the last 4 years to cover his educational trust. We prepaid his tuition. Why on earth would you need another $35,000 overnight? Jason flinched. His face flushed a deep, angry red. He took a step toward me, his tone shifting from pleading to aggressive entitlement. Dad, do you think I am making this up? You just have to trust me. Do you want your only grandson working a minimum wage job for the rest of his life just because you were too stubborn to write a check? The sheer audacity of his words hit me like a freight train. He was using Tyler as a weapon against me. But as I looked closely at my son, staring at his trembling hands, the sweat dripping from his chin and the wild panic in his eyes, the gut feeling from a month ago roared back to life. This was not the face of a father worried about a college application. This was a man running from a fire he had started himself. There was no glitch. There was no frozen bank account. It was all a desperate lie. He was standing in my home trying to extort me to save his own skin. The unconditional love I always felt for him had presently slammed into a wall of cold reality. The fog of paternal blindness lifted. I looked at the man standing in my hallway, a stranger wearing the face of my son. Jason, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerously calm whisper. I am not giving you a single dime. His jaw dropped. Dad, you cannot do this. You have the money. You will ruin his whole life. No, I replied, stepping closer until I was inches from his face. Whatever is happening, you did this. You are lying to me, and you are using my grandson as a shield. I am done. The face of Jason twisted in rage. He opened his mouth to shout, raising a finger toward my face. Before he could utter another word, I firmly grabbed him by the collar of his wet shirt, shoved him backward onto the porch, and looked him dead in the eyes. Do not ever come back here, I roared, and I slammed the heavy oak door shut right in his face. After I slammed the door, the sudden silence in my house was deafening. I stood in the foyer with my back pressed against the heavy oak wood, listening to the muffled sound of the rain pounding against the front porch. My chest was heaving. I could hear the engine of Jason's car roaring to life in the driveway, followed by the aggressive screech of his tires backing out into the street. He was gone. The confrontation was over, but the adrenaline coursing through my veins made my hands shake uncontrollably. I walked slowly into the dark kitchen, turned on the small light sheet above the stainless steel stove, and poured myself a tall glass of freezing cold water. I tried to steady my breathing, but my mind was a chaotic whirlwind of questions. A ridiculous system glitch. A supposedly frozen bank account. A sudden $35,000 emergency. None of it felt right. None of it aligned with the son I thought I knew or the life I thought I had helped him build. I left the glass of water untouched on the granite counter and walked down the long hallway to my home office. As a retired structural engineer, my life had always been governed by mathematics, logic, and undeniable facts. When a bridge fails, it is not because of bad luck. It is because somewhere in the foundation, the numbers did not add up. Stress points were ignored. Materials were compromised. I needed to look at the numbers. I turned on the brass desk lamp, casting a warm glow over my heavy mahogany desk. I unlocked the bottom drawer and pulled out my thick, leather-bound ledger. Even in the age of digital banking, I kept physical records of every major transaction. It was a habit from the old days, a way to physically touch the reality of my finances. I opened the ledger and ran my index finger down the columns of carefully handwritten entries. There it was. 5 years ago, a wire transfer for $200,000. That was the down payment for the beautiful 4-bedroom colonial house Jason and his wife Melanie had fallen in love with. They told me it was their dream home, the perfect place to raise Tyler. I did not hesitate to liquidate a portion of my retirement portfolio to make it happen. I wanted my family to have a solid foundation. But the house was only the beginning. I flipped the page to the next section. 4 years ago when Tyler was accepted into an elite private high school. Jason came to me looking worried. He said the tuition was incredibly steep, and they were struggling to balance the mortgage with the educational costs. Again, I stepped in. Over the course of 4 years, I systematically transferred a total of $180,000 into a dedicated educational trust account. The explicit purpose of that money was to prepay his high school tuition and secure his early college enrollment fees. I picked up a yellow legal pad and a pen. I wrote down the figures: 200,000 plus 180,000. Total $380,000. I stared at the sum. It was a massive amount of money, the culmination of decades of early mornings and late nights on construction sites. But I had given it willingly, believing it was securing my legacy. Now I tapped the pen against the paper, letting the cold, hard logic take over. If I had fully funded the educational trust, the tuition was already paid directly from that specific account. A random flag for fraudulent activity on Jason's personal checking account would have absolutely no impact on a separate prepaid educational trust. Furthermore, universities do not cancel a student's admission overnight due to a banking glitch, and they certainly do not demand $35,000 in cold hard cash the very next morning. The math simply did not work. The physics of his story violated every rule of reality. The plausible lie he tried to sell me on my front porch shattered completely in the quiet illumination of my office. Jason was not a victim of a banking error. He was the architect of a massive financial black hole, and he was desperately trying to plug a leak before the entire dam collapsed. But where did $380,000 go? How could a family living in a paid-off luxury home with no educational expenses suddenly find themselves begging for cash in the middle of the night? I leaned back in my leather chair and closed my eyes. The image of Tyler missing his own graduation party flashed into my mind. Then came the memory of Jason sweating and desperate, using Tyler's future as leverage to extort me. A dark, terrifying realization began to take root in my chest. If Jason lied about the money tonight, he likely lied about the graduation party last month. If he lied about the graduation party, what else was he hiding? The panic attack, the small private dinner, the lost email. It was all a meticulously constructed facade. My grief and confusion began to harden into something entirely different. It turned into a cold, calculated determination. I had spent my entire career diagnosing structural failures, finding the invisible cracks before they caused a catastrophe. My family was collapsing, and my own son was handing me fabricated blueprints to cover his tracks. I was not going to sit in the dark and wait for the next desperate knock on my door. I was not going to let him use my grandson as a pawn in whatever twisted game he was playing. I slowly opened my laptop and checked the time. It was well past midnight. The rain was finally stopping, leaving a heavy silence over the quiet neighborhood. I knew exactly what I had to do. Tomorrow morning, I would finally find out the absolute truth. The sun rose over the neighborhood without bringing any warmth. I did not bother making coffee. I certainly did not bother calling my son. Talking to Jason now would only give him another opportunity to spin a web of lies. I needed cold, hard facts, and I knew exactly where to get them. I grabbed my keys from the kitchen counter and drove straight to the prestigious preparatory academy where Tyler was supposedly enrolled. It was a sprawling, immaculate campus with manicured lawns, massive oak trees, and historic brick buildings that looked like they belonged in a magazine. This was the elite institution I had poured $180,000 into over the last 4 years. Every pristine pathway, every modern classroom, and every stone archway on this campus was paid for by the sweat of my labor. I parked my heavy truck in the visitor lot, my jaw set with grim determination. I walked through the heavy wooden doors of the main administration building, my boots echoing loudly on the polished marble floors. The reception area was quiet, decorated in rich mahogany and dark leather furniture that smelled like old money. A young secretary sat behind a massive wooden desk, typing quietly on her computer. "May I help you, sir?" she asked with a polite, practiced smile. "I am Rick Dawson," I said, keeping my voice level but firm. "I am the grandfather of Tyler Dawson and the primary financial sponsor of his education at this academy. I need to speak with the principal immediately." She blinked, her professional smile faltering slightly. "I am sorry, Mr. Dawson, but the principal is extremely busy preparing for the upcoming summer session and does not have any appointments available this morning. If you would like to schedule a meeting for sometime next week, I can certainly arrange that." I did not raise my voice. I did not have to. I simply leaned forward, resting both of my hands flat on the polished surface of her desk. "I am not asking for an appointment." I told her, my eyes locked directly onto hers. "I have invested nearly $200,000 into this academy, and I am going to speak with the principal right now. Whether that conversation happens behind closed doors or right here in this open lobby is entirely up to you." The secretary swallowed hard, her eyes widening slightly at my tone. She picked up her desk phone, pressed a single button, and whispered a few hurried words into the receiver. Less than a minute later, the heavy oak door behind her opened. A tall, gray-haired man wearing a tailored navy suit stepped out into the lobby. "Mr. Dawson," he said, extending a manicured hand toward me. "I am Principal Harrison. Please come into my office so we can talk comfortably." I completely ignored his hand and walked straight past him into the spacious, brightly lit room. I waited until he closed the heavy door behind us before I turned to face him. "I apologize for the sudden intrusion. Principal Harrison," I began, keeping my posture rigid and my tone strictly business. "But I need immediate clarification regarding my grandson. My son Jason informed me last night that Tyler suffered a severe panic attack right before graduation last month, and that the school allowed him to have a small, private diploma ceremony. Furthermore, I was explicitly told there was a major billing issue yesterday regarding his college transcript release. I need to know exactly what is going on with his records." Principal Harrison stopped walking toward his desk. The polite professional smile vanished from his face, replaced by a look of confusion and deep pity. He slowly walked around his desk and sat down in his leather chair, gesturing for me to take the seat opposite him. I remained standing, crossing my arms over my chest. "Mr. Dawson," the principal said softly, carefully, choosing his words as if he were speaking to a fragile patient. "I am not sure what your son has been telling you these past few weeks, but there was no private graduation ceremony last month. Tyler did not have a panic attack, at least not one that the school counselors are aware of." I stared at him, my heart suddenly pounding against my ribs. "What do you mean by that?" I asked, my voice dropping to a barely audible whisper. "He is part of the graduating class. He has been a dedicated student here for 4 years. Principal Harrison let out a heavy, sorrowful sigh, opened a file drawer, and pulled out a thick manila folder. He placed it carefully on the desk and looked up at me with sympathetic eyes. "Mr. Dawson, Tyler is not part of the graduating class. He has not been a student at this academy for a very long time. In fact, Tyler was administratively withdrawn from this school exactly 6 months ago." The spacious office suddenly felt like it was shrinking. The room started to spin around me. 6 months. I repeated, my legs suddenly feeling so incredibly weak that I finally sank slowly down into the leather guest chair behind me. Why? How could that possibly happen without my direct knowledge and consent? The principal opened the manila folder and pushed a stack of unpaid invoices across the desk toward me. "Because the tuition checks completely stopped clearing last November," he explained gently. "We sent multiple warning notices, made dozens of phone calls, and even offered payment plans to your son to keep Tyler enrolled. My son Jason completely ignored all of our attempts to help. Eventually, we had no choice left but to expel Tyler for non-payment." I stared blankly at the invoices bearing my son's name. The panic attack, the small graduation party, the emergency college deposit. It was all a massive, complete fabrication. I walked out of the principal's office and back into the blinding morning sunlight. The crisp, clean air of the academy grounds suddenly made me feel sick to my stomach. The money was now entirely gone, and my innocent grandson's future had been brutally stolen by his own father. I sat in my truck for a long time, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My own son had taken hundreds of thousands of dollars, squandered it on God knows what, and then allowed his only child to be expelled. But the most pressing question was not where the money went. It was where Tyler had gone. An 18-year-old boy without a high school diploma and without a dollar to his name had to be somewhere. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my old text messages with Tyler. For the past 6 months, his replies had been incredibly brief, usually just 1 or 2 words, and then they had stopped altogether. I closed my eyes and tried to remember any detail, any passing comment he might have made before the silence began. Then it hit me. About 8 months ago, right before the holidays, Tyler had excitedly told me about a mechanic shop on the industrial east side of town. He said he was hanging around there after school, sweeping floors and watching the mechanics rebuild classic car engines. Jason had been furious about it, calling it a filthy distraction from his elite studies. I immediately started the engine and drove toward the east side. The transition from the manicured lawns of the academy to the crumbling infrastructure of the industrial district was jarring. The roads were riddled with massive potholes, and the air smelled heavily of diesel fuel and burning rubber. Dilapidated warehouses with broken windows lined the narrow streets. I slowly navigated my truck past chain-link fences topped with razor wire until I spotted a faded, rusted metal sign hanging off a cinder-block building. It read, "Southside Auto Repair." The parking lot was packed with half-dismantled cars sitting on cinder blocks. The loud, piercing screech of an air wrench echoed from the open bay doors. I parked my truck by the chain-link gate and walked toward the dark, cavernous garage. The inside of the shop was sweltering hot and smelled overwhelmingly of old motor oil, sweat, and exhaust fumes. Several mechanics were hunched over engine bays, their clothes stained black with grease. I walked past a pile of discarded tires and scanned the dimly lit room. Underneath a rusty dented pickup truck elevated on a hydraulic lift, I saw a pair of legs sticking out. The kid was wearing heavily stained blue coveralls and worn-out work boots. I stepped closer, my heart pounding in my chest. I recognized those boots. I had bought them for him 2 Christmases ago. "Tyler," I said, my voice barely carrying over the loud hum of a nearby air compressor. The mechanic stopped working. The heavy wrench dropped to the concrete floor with a loud clang. He slowly grabbed the edge of the wooden creeper and rolled himself out from under the heavy truck. He stood up and wiped his forehead with the back of a filthy rag. It was my grandson. But he did not look like the bright, energetic boy I knew. His face was smeared with dark engine grease. There were dark, heavy bags under his eyes, and he looked dangerously thin. The carefree spark that used to light up his face was completely gone, replaced by a hardened, exhausted stare. He looked at me, and for a split second, I saw a flicker of surprise in his eyes. Then his entire posture stiffened, and that surprise instantly hardened into pure, unadulterated anger. "For you," I said, taking a step forward with my hands raised in a calming gesture. "I just came from the academy. The principal told me everything. I know you were expelled 6 months ago. We need to talk about what your father has done." Tyler let out a harsh, bitter laugh that sounded incredibly wrong coming from his young throat. "What my father has done," he repeated, his voice dripping with venom and sarcasm. "Are you seriously trying to blame this on him? You are the one who ruined everything. You are the one who cut us off." I stopped dead in my tracks. "What are you talking about?" I asked, genuinely confused. Tyler stepped aggressively toward me, his hands balled into tight fists at his sides. "Do not play dumb with me, Grandpa," he spat the word sounding like a curse. "Mom and Dad told me exactly what happened. They told me you decided to stop paying for my tuition because you wanted to spend your retirement money on luxury cruises and golf trips. They begged you to keep funding my education, and you laughed in their faces. You told them I was a waste of money. You threw me away like garbage. The sheer force of the lie hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. I stood there surrounded by the deafening noise of the grimy garage, absorbing the incredible magnitude of the betrayal. Jason and Melanie had not just stolen my money and ruined my grandson's education. They had systematically poisoned his mind against me. They had painted me as a selfish, heartless monster to cover up their own massive financial crimes. They had convinced this poor boy that his grandfather, the man who loved him more than anything in the world, had abandoned him for a luxury vacation. I looked into Tyler's angry, heartbroken eyes and realized the true depth of the evil I was dealing with. I had to save him right now. I did not raise my voice or try to argue. Arguing with a young boy fed toxic lies for 6 months would only push him much further away. I stood there in the noisy garage and let him catch his own breath. His chest was heaving and his fists were trembling. "Tyler," I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. "I am not going to stand here and trade insults with you. I do not want you to just take my word for it. I want you to see the truth with your own 2 eyes. Do not move." I turned around and walked straight out of the dim, incredibly hot garage back into the bright midday sun. I marched to my truck, unlocked the passenger door, and reached deep into the center console. I pulled out the thick leather ledger and the printed bank statements I had meticulously reviewed the night before. My hands were steady now. The shock had passed, and only a cold, sharp focus remained. I walked back into the garage with the heavy stack of papers tucked under my arm. Tyler was still standing by the workbench, watching me with a mixture of deep suspicion and lingering anger. I cleared a spot on the greasy wooden table, pushing aside a pile of rusted spark plugs and dirty shop rags. I slammed the heavy leather ledger down onto the greasy table. "Come here," I instructed him, tapping the cover of the book. "Look at this." Tyler hesitated, his jaw tight, but curiosity won out over pride. He dragged his heavy boots across the concrete floor and stood beside me. I opened the ledger and flipped to the pages documenting the last 4 years. I smoothed out the official bank statements next to my handwritten notes. "Look at the dates," I told him, pointing my index finger at the first highlighted row. 4 years ago, when you were accepted into the academy, your father said he could not afford tuition. I transferred $45,000 into an educational trust that very same week. Look at the bank stamp." Tyler leaned in closer, his eyes scanning the official seal from the bank. I slowly dragged my finger down the column, pointing to the subsequent rows. The next year, another 45,000. The year after that, another 45,000. And here is the final payment made right before your senior year began. $180,000, Tyler. Every single penny of your tuition was prepaid in full by me. I never cut you off. I never took a luxury cruise. I gave your parents everything they asked for, so you would never have to worry about your future. Tyler stared down at the documents. The mechanic noises in the background seemed to fade away, leaving only the sound of his ragged breathing. His grease-stained fingers hovered over the paper, tracing the numbers to physically feel them. The official bank logos, the transfer confirmation codes, the dates. It was absolute, undeniable proof. He read the documents over and over again. I watched as the hardened, angry mask he had been wearing for months slowly began to crack. His shoulders slumped forward. The hostility drained from his face, replaced by a look of sheer horror. He realized in that exact moment that the people who were supposed to protect him had stolen his entire future and then blamed it on the only person who actually tried to help him. Why, he whispered, his voice cracking violently. "Why would they do this to me? Why would they lie about you?" He could not hold it in any longer. The tough mechanic facade completely shattered. He buried his face in his hands and his shoulders began to shake with deep, uncontrollable sobs. I did not hesitate. I reached out and pulled my grandson into a tight embrace. He buried his face in my shoulder, crying like a lost child, completely ruining my clean shirt with engine grease and tears. I did not care about the shirt. I held him firmly, patting his back, while he let out months of repressed pain, humiliation, and betrayal. "I am so sorry, Tyler," I whispered into his ear. "I am so sorry I did not see this sooner. But I am here now, and I am going to fix this. I promise you." We stood there until his sobbing finally slowed. He pulled away, wiping his tear-stained face with his dirty sleeve. He looked at me, his eyes red and swollen, but there was a new spark in them now. It was the spark of clarity. "Grandpa, I do not understand," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "If they did not pay the school, where did all that money go?" I closed the ledger and let out a heavy sigh. "That is exactly what we are going to find out," I told him grimly. "But it is worse than you think. It is not just your tuition. I also gave them $200,000 for the down payment on their house. That is nearly $400,000, completely unaccounted for. Last night your father came to my house begging for another $35,000, claiming it was an emergency college deposit. He lied about your graduation party to keep me away. He is hiding a massive financial secret, and he is desperate." I looked around the dirty garage and then looked directly into his eyes. "I need to uncover exactly what your parents are doing, Tyler, but I cannot do it from the outside. They are completely shutting me out. I need someone inside that house who can be my eyes and ears. I need an inside man." Tyler did not hesitate for a single second. The boy who had been broken just moments ago suddenly stood up straight, his expression hardening into pure determination. "Tell me exactly what you need me to do," he said firmly. I looked at my grandson, seeing the fierce resolve burning in his eyes, and I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I placed my hand on his shoulder and gave it a firm squeeze. "For now, you do exactly what you have been doing," I told him. "You go to work. You go home. You keep your head down, and you act like you are still angry with me. Do not let them suspect that we have spoken. But while you are in that house, I need you to keep your eyes wide open. Look for any mail from banks, legal notices, or financial documents they might have left out. Take pictures with your phone and send them to me. But only do it when you are absolutely sure it is safe." Tyler nodded, wiping the last remnants of grease and tears from his face. "I can do that," he promised. "I will get you whatever you need." I left him there in the sweltering garage and got back into my truck. The emotional confrontation had drained me, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. I knew I could not navigate this massive financial web alone. I needed professionals. I needed sharks. I drove straight from the industrial district into the heart of the downtown business sector. I parked my truck in a sleek underground garage and took the elevator up to the 30th floor of a towering glass building. This was the office of Victor Sterling. Victor was a ruthless, highly connected real estate lawyer who had represented my engineering firm for over 2 decades. He was not a man known for his warmth or his bedside manner. He was known for completely destroying the opposition in a courtroom. I walked into his spacious office, bypassing his secretary, with a brief nod, and sat down in the leather chair across from his desk. Victor looked up from his computer, his sharp gray eyes instantly assessing my grim expression. "Rick," he said, closing his laptop, "you look like you are ready to tear a building down with your bare hands. What is going on?" I did not waste any time with pleasantries. I laid out the entire situation, starting from the empty graduation party and ending with the heartbreaking conversation I just had with Tyler in the mechanic shop. I told him about the missing $380,000 and the desperate demand for $35,000 more. Victor listened in absolute silence, steepling his fingers under his chin. When I finished, he let out a long, slow breath. "Your son has not just made a mistake, Rick," Victor said, his voice cold and analytical. "He has orchestrated a massive, sustained fraud. And to pull off a deception of this magnitude, he has to be hiding a monumental amount of debt. We are not just going to guess what he did. We are going to follow the paper trail. Victor picked up his phone and made a brief call. 10 minutes later, a woman walked into the office. She was dressed in a sharp black suit carrying a thick leather briefcase. Rick, Victor said, gesturing toward her. This is Sarah Jenkins. She is a forensic accountant. She specializes in tracking hidden assets and uncovering financial crimes. If your son spent a single dime of your money, Sarah will find out exactly where it went. I shook her hand. We got straight to work. I provided Sarah with all of my bank statements, the dates of the wire transfers, and the exact address of the luxury home I had helped them purchase. I authorized her to dig into whatever public records, property deeds, and tax filings she could legally access. I sat in that office for 4 hours, drinking terrible black coffee while Sarah tapped furiously on her laptop. Victor paced back and forth, occasionally reviewing a document she printed out. The tension in the room was suffocating. I kept thinking about Tyler, forced to abandon his education, to turn wrenches, all while his parents lived in a pristine colonial mansion that I had paid for. Finally, Sarah stopped typing. She took off her reading glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. Her expression was incredibly grim. Mr. Dawson? She began looking at me with a mixture of professional detachment and genuine pity. I have found the first massive red flag. And I am afraid it is much worse than you anticipated. She turned her laptop screen toward me so I could see a complex spreadsheet. Let us start with the house, she said, pointing a manicured finger at a line of data. 5 years ago, you transferred $200,000 directly to the title company for the down payment. That secured the property and gave them immediate equity. I nodded, leaning forward. Yes, I confirmed. I wanted them to have a solid financial foundation. They told me the mortgage payments would be easily manageable with that large initial investment. Sarah let out a heavy sigh. They lied to you from the very beginning, she stated bluntly. Less than 30 days after the ink dried on the original closing documents, Jason and Melanie took out a secret second mortgage on the property. They used the massive equity you provided to collateralize a new high-risk loan. They essentially pulled your entire $200,000 down payment right back out of the house in the form of cold, hard cash. I stared at the screen, my mind struggling to process the sheer audacity of their actions. They took out a second mortgage immediately, I asked, my voice rising in disbelief. Why would they intentionally put themselves in that much debt right off the bat? Because they wanted the cash, Victor interjected, his voice dripping with disgust. They used your gift to unlock a massive line of credit. And look at the terms of that loan, Rick. They are paying a predatory interest rate. A predatory interest rate. I repeated the words, tasting like ash in my mouth. I looked at the numbers glowing brightly on the computer screen. They were borrowing money at nearly 15% just to get their hands on liquid cash. But why, I asked, leaning much closer to the heavy wooden desk. Jason makes a very decent salary as a regional sales director. They have a beautiful home. Even with a second mortgage, where did almost $400,000 completely vanish to over the span of just a few short years? Sarah clicked her sleek wireless mouse, minimizing the property records and opening a new color-coded spreadsheet. That is exactly what I spent the last 3 hours tracing, she explained gently. When people secure a massive lump sum of cash through a secondary loan, they usually do it to consolidate other debts, cover a medical emergency, or invest in a tangible asset. Your son and daughter-in-law did absolutely none of those responsible things. She turned the bright monitor slightly more toward me so I could clearly see the data. They used your life savings to fund an absolute illusion. They bought a lifestyle they could never actually afford. I squinted at the screen, my tired eyes scanning the endless rows of detailed transactions. The very first category was highlighted in a bright, sickening shade of red. It was a recurring annual payment to an exclusive, highly restrictive country club. Sarah pointed her pen directly to the grand total at the bottom. Melanie initiated a premium family membership the very same month they moved into the new house, Sarah explained. The initiation fee alone was $25,000. The annual dues are $40,000 a year, not including the mandatory monthly dining minimums, the private tennis lessons, and the weekly premium spa treatments. I sat back in my leather chair, feeling a sudden intense wave of profound nausea wash over me. I vividly remembered the blistering heat of the July sun beating down on my hard hat while I inspected dangerous bridge girders. I remembered the sharp ache in my lower back that kept me awake for countless nights throughout my career. All of that physical pain, all of that selfless sacrifice was currently funding cucumber facials, expensive champagne brunches, and private clay court tennis lessons for a woman who did not work a single day in her entire adult life. But the country club was only the beginning of the massive financial hemorrhage. Sarah scrolled down slowly to the next major section of the spreadsheet. 2 years ago, right around the exact time Tyler proudly started high school, they decided their perfectly good sedans were no longer suitable for their new affluent neighborhood. They willfully signed predatory leases on 2 brand-new top-of-the-line luxury sport utility vehicles. We are talking about massive imports that cost well over $90,000 each, Sarah said, shaking her head in sheer disbelief. The monthly lease payments combined with the premium insurance requirements for such cars are draining nearly $3,000 a month directly from their main checking account. They desperately needed to make sure they looked the part when they pulled into the country club parking lot or the prep school drop-off lane. The rest of the document was a sickening tapestry of pure, unadulterated vanity. There were tens of thousands of dollars carelessly spent at high-end designer clothing boutiques. There were massive charges from upscale catering companies for lavish dinner parties hosted at their colonial home. There were extravagant weekend trips to luxury resorts, incredibly expensive jewelry purchases, and regular unexplained withdrawals of large sums of cash. Melanie was practically bleeding the shared accounts completely dry, just to play the glamorous role of a wealthy socialite. She was actively buying the envy of her neighbors and the fake admiration of her shallow peers. And Jason, entirely eager to maintain the grand facade of a highly successful business executive, simply let her do it. He stood by silently and watched as his greedy wife set fire to the money I had generously given them to secure my grandson's educational future. My blood began to genuinely boil. It was a deep, primal anger that started in the very pit of my stomach and radiated out rapidly to my trembling fingertips. I forcefully gripped the wooden armrests of my chair so tightly that my knuckles turned completely white under the office lighting. I clearly pictured Tyler just a few short hours ago lying painfully on a wooden creeper under a rusted pickup truck covered entirely in thick black engine grease and sobbing brokenly into his dirty hands. I pictured him sweeping the filthy concrete floors of a sweltering garage simply because he had been mercilessly expelled from his school for unpaid tuition, while my bright teenage grandson was literally thrown out into the harsh streets to perform grueling manual labor. His mother was happily sipping imported wine at private charity galas, wearing designer dresses paid for by my stolen retirement funds. They stole his life so she could comfortably play pretend. I whispered, my voice heavily shaking, with a potent rage I had never experienced before. They maliciously let their own child take the painful fall for their incredible bottomless greed. Victor walked slowly over to the desk and placed a firm, grounding hand on my right shoulder. "It is a tragic, classic tale of financial delusion, Rick," he said quietly. "They get a small taste of the high life using someone else's money, and they become completely addicted to the elevated status. When the cash from the second mortgage started running out, they had to quickly choose between maintaining the country club facade or paying the school tuition. They always selfishly chose the empty facade. They willingly sacrificed their own precious son just to keep their wealthy new friends from ever finding out they were completely broke and living a lie." I sat in Victor's office, letting the horrifying reality of their vanity wash over me. They had traded their son's future for country club dinners and luxury cars. But as Sarah continued to scroll through the endless spreadsheets of frivolous spending, one massive question still gnawed at the back of my mind. If they were living beyond their means and slowly going broke, why did Jason show up at my door last night in an absolute panic? A slow financial bleed does not produce the kind of frantic, sweating desperation I saw in his eyes. He was terrified of something immediate, something catastrophic. The answer to that question came later that same night. I was sitting in my dark living room, staring blankly at the television, when my cell phone vibrated sharply against the glass coffee table. It was past 2 in the morning. I picked it up and saw a string of encrypted text messages from Tyler. He was making his move. My heart hammered in my chest as I opened the messages. Tyler had waited until his parents were deeply asleep before creeping out of his bedroom. He managed to pick the flimsy lock on the heavy oak doors of Jason's private home office. Tyler sent me a brief text describing the scene. The room was a complete disaster, littered with final notice bills and aggressive collection letters they had been hiding from each other. But Tyler did not focus on everyday junk mail. He went straight for the locked bottom drawer of Jason's mahogany desk, the one his father explicitly forbade anyone from touching. Using a flathead screwdriver he had smuggled home from the mechanic shop, Tyler pried the drawer open and found a thick, unmarked manila envelope stuffed with legal documents. My phone buzzed continuously for the next 10 minutes as Tyler meticulously photographed every page inside that envelope under the dim light of his smartphone flashlight. The images were slightly blurry, captured by a boy whose hands were undoubtedly shaking from the sheer terror of being caught. But they were legible enough. I quickly replied, telling him to put everything back exactly as he found it, lock the door, and get safely back to bed. I did not sleep for the rest of the night. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the glowing screen of my phone, trying to decipher the dense legal jargon in the photographs. First thing the next morning, I drove straight back to Victor's office and placed printed copies of Tyler's late-night surveillance directly onto Sarah's desk. The forensic accountant adjusted her glasses and carefully arranged the printed photographs across the polished wood. The room was perfectly silent as her eyes darted back and forth between the stolen documents and her own financial database. It took her less than 20 minutes to piece the entire puzzle together. When she finally looked up, her expression was a mix of professional disbelief and profound disgust. "Mr. Dawson," she began, her voice steady but laced with a sharp edge, "it appears your daughter-in-law did not just want to look wealthy. She wanted to play the role of a brilliant venture capitalist among her high society friends." Sarah pointed to a series of heavily redacted emails and a beautifully printed, yet entirely fake investment prospectus. Melanie used whatever cash she had left from the second mortgage to buy her way into an exclusive, unregulated private investment group. She convinced 3 of her wealthy country club friends to pool their money with hers, promising them guaranteed returns on a revolutionary new tech startup. I leaned forward, my brow furrowing in deep confusion. "A tech startup?" I asked. "Since when does Melanie know anything about technology or private equity investing?" "She does not," Victor answered grimly, stepping up to the desk. "And neither did the person running the fund." Sarah tapped her pen forcefully against the central document, a terrifying legal cease and desist letter drafted by an aggressive litigation firm. The entire startup was a complete shell company, Rick. It was a classic predatory Ponzi scheme. The founder took their pooled money, paid off his early investors, and completely vanished overnight. Melanie lost everything she invested. But that is not the worst part. Because Melanie was the one who actively recruited her friends and personally guaranteed their returns with her own signature, they now hold her entirely responsible for their massive financial losses. I stared blankly at the legal letter, the missing pieces rapidly falling completely into place. "The primary plaintiff in this lawsuit is a woman named Patricia," Sarah explained, tracing the typed name with her finger. "Patricia discovered the massive fraud last week and immediately threatened to go to the authorities. She drafted this formal complaint accusing Melanie of direct wire fraud, deliberate misrepresentation, and operating an unlicensed securities scheme. Patricia explicitly stated she would hand this entire file over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation unless Melanie completely reimbursed her initial investment by the end of the week. Sarah looked me dead in the eye, delivering the final crushing blow. The exact amount of Patricia's initial investment was $35,000. The room went completely silent. My blood ran much colder than ice. The desperate pounding on my door, the frantic sweating in the rain, the tragic story about a university banking glitch and Tyler losing his freshman spot. It was all an elaborate, sickening performance. The $35,000 Jason begged for had absolutely nothing to do with saving Tyler's future. It was emergency hush money. Jason was trying to extort his own elderly father to quickly pay off a furious country club socialite before she called the FBI and sent his wife to federal prison. They were willing to look me in the eye, completely weaponize my deep love for my grandson, and steal my money just to keep themselves out of handcuffs. The sheer depravity of it completely took my very breath away. I sat in Victor's office for a long time after Sarah finished speaking. The sheer depravity of it completely took my very breath away. I had spent my entire life trying to be a good father, sacrificing my own comfort so my son could thrive. And his gratitude was an attempt to extort me to save his wife from federal prison. Victor poured me a glass of water, sensing the profound shock radiating from me. I drank it slowly, letting the cold liquid ground me. The immediate threat was clear, but the forensic accountant warned me that this was likely only the surface. When people are this desperate, they do not just have one escape plan. They have multiple. I needed to know exactly what else Jason was hiding in that house. I drove home and waited until evening to send a highly secure message to Tyler. I told him what we had uncovered about the Ponzi scheme and the lawsuit. I told him to be incredibly careful, but if he saw any opportunity to look deeper into his father's offenses, we needed more information. 2 grueling days passed without any word. The silence was agonizing. I paced the floors of my empty house, jumping every time a car drove past my window. Then, on Thursday night, at exactly 1 a.m, my phone screen finally lit up in the dark. It was Tyler. He sent a brief text saying his parents had consumed a large amount of wine at dinner and were deeply asleep upstairs. He was going back into the home office. He said he was going to open the bottom right drawer of the mahogany desk. It was the only drawer he could not open during his first search, because it was secured with a heavy-duty deadbolt lock. He told me he was going to force it open with a pry bar he brought from the mechanic shop. I immediately texted him back, telling him to stop, that it was far too dangerous and loud. But he did not answer. The agonizing minutes ticked by. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the blank screen, terrified that I was going to hear my phone ring with a call from the police. 10 minutes later, my phone vibrated. Tyler sent a single photograph. It was a picture of the heavy wooden drawer splintered and broken around the lock mechanism. He had done it. Then another picture came through. It was a thick, dark red file folder resting on the carpet. Printed neatly on the top label were the words, Dawson Medical and Legal. My initial thought was that it had something to do with my late wife, perhaps some old hospital bills Jason had kept for tax purposes. But my name was the only one on the label. I texted Tyler asking him to open the folder and photograph every single page inside. The first few images that loaded on my screen made absolutely no sense to me. They were glossy, high-resolution scans of medical brochures. The large, bold titles across the front of the pamphlets read, Navigating Severe Cognitive Decline and Preparing Your Loved Ones for Advanced Dementia. There were highlighted sections regarding memory loss, erratic behavior, and sudden financial confusion in the elderly. I swiped to the next photograph, my hands beginning to tremble slightly. It was a printed checklist from a local assisted living facility that specialized in high-security memory care. The boxes for locked wards and restricted visitor access were heavily circled in red ink. My heart began to hammer violently against my ribs. I do not have dementia. My mind is sharper than it has ever been. Why would Jason be secretly collecting medical literature about severe mental decline? The answer came in the final batch of photographs Tyler sent. They were not glossy brochures. They were dense, formally drafted legal documents from a prominent family law attorney in the city. I zoomed in on the harsh black text, reading the chilling legal terminology. It was a preliminary draft for a petition for appointment of conservator. I read the paragraphs outlining the grounds for the petition. The document falsely claimed that I, Rick Dawson, had recently demonstrated a severe and dangerous pattern of mental instability. It explicitly cited my supposed failure to attend my own grandson's high school graduation as primary evidence of my rapid cognitive decline and detachment from reality. It claimed I was recklessly squandering my life savings and posing a direct threat to my own physical well-being. The sheer calculated malice of those printed words completely paralyzed me. They were not just broke. They were not just desperate. They were actively plotting to completely destroy my life. The false story about the canceled graduation party was not just a pathetic excuse to cover up Tyler being expelled. It was a carefully planted seed, a fabricated medical event they intended to use as documented evidence against me in a court of law. Their ultimate goal was laid out clearly on the final page of the petition. Jason was requesting complete legal control over my person and my entire estate. He was asking a judge to strip away all of my civil rights, declare me completely incompetent, and grant him total access to my $2 million retirement portfolio and the deed to my house. They planned to lock me away in a secure memory care facility where nobody would believe a word I said. They would sell my home, liquidate my hard-earned assets, and use my money to pay off the furious country club socialite, clear their massive second mortgage, and continue living their fake, lavish lifestyle. They were going to bury me alive to save themselves. The financial conflict was instantly over. This was no longer about stolen tuition or hidden debts. The stakes had suddenly become a terrifying matter of life and death. My own flesh had betrayed me. I did not sleep after receiving those photographs from Tyler. I sat in the dark living room, staring at the wall, until the sun crept over the horizon. At 8 o'clock in the morning, I walked into Victor's office for the second time that week. I did not bother knocking. I walked past his secretary and dropped my phone onto the center of his glass desk. "Read them," I told him, my voice a hoarse whisper. "Just read every single word." Victor looked at my pale, exhausted face, picked up the phone, and began scrolling through the images of the red medical folder and the legal drafts. The professional, detached demeanor he usually maintained completely vanished. A deep, heavy frown carved lines into his forehead as his eyes scanned the digital text. He read the entire petition in absolute silence. When he finally placed the phone back down onto the desk, he looked genuinely disturbed. "Rick," he said quietly, leaning back in his chair, "in all my years of practicing law, I have seen families do terrible things to each other over money. But this is a completely different level of cruelty. They are not just trying to steal from you. They are trying to erase you." Victor connected my phone to his office printer, printing out high-resolution copies of the documents so we could analyze them line by line. He laid the pages out across his desk. "Let us look at their primary argument," Victor said, pointing his silver pen at the second page of the petition. "In order for a judge to grant a conservatorship, the petitioner must prove that the subject is incapable of managing their own affairs or making rational decisions. Jason is heavily relying on a fabricated medical narrative. Look right here." Victor highlighted a dense paragraph of legal text. "Jason officially documented that you suffered a severe multi-day dissociative episode last month. He claims you completely forgot your only grandson's high school graduation, drove around the city aimlessly, in a state of deep confusion, and then aggressively hallucinated a completely different timeline. He is framing your perfectly reasonable confusion about the canceled party as a terrifying symptom of advanced dementia." I felt a wave of profound nausea wash over me. So that was the real reason he lied to me on the front porch that Saturday. I realized aloud, the sick genius of his plan finally becoming clear. He did not just lie to cover up the expulsion. He intentionally created a documented incident. He set a trap knowing I would show up confused, so he could officially record that confusion as a medical crisis. He probably even sent an email to himself backdating it, just to create a fake digital paper trail proving he had warned me about the party. Victor nodded grimly. Exactly, he confirmed. And he is combining that fake medical crisis with financial instability. He notes here that you have been recklessly transferring massive amounts of cash out of your retirement accounts, specifically referencing the $380,000 you voluntarily gave them. He is twisting your generosity into a symptom of severe financial incompetence. I dragged both of my hands down my face, feeling the rough stubble on my jaw. What happens if a judge actually believes this garbage? I asked, my voice trembling slightly with suppressed rage. What exactly is their endgame here? Victor flipped to the final page of the printed petition, tapping the conclusion with his finger. If a judge grants this conservatorship, Jason becomes your absolute legal guardian, Victor explained coldly. You will instantly lose the right to make any decisions for yourself. You will not be able to vote, drive a car, or even choose where you live. And most importantly, Jason will gain total, unrestricted access to your entire financial portfolio. We both knew exactly what that meant. I had worked tirelessly for 4 decades as a structural engineer. Through careful saving and smart investing, I had built a retirement portfolio worth over $2 million, entirely, completely separate from the value of my fully paid-off home. If Jason gained control of that trust, all of his massive problems would vanish overnight. He could easily liquidate $35,000 to pay off Patricia and stop the FBI investigation. He could wipe out the predatory second mortgage they secretly took out. He could easily afford the country club dues, the luxury car leases, and the fake socialite lifestyle Melanie was so desperately addicted to. And he would pay for it all by legally draining my life savings dry. And what happens to me? I asked quietly, staring at the polished wood of Victor's desk. Where do I go while they spend my money? Victor pointed to the glossy medical brochures Tyler had photographed earlier. You go exactly where they put you, he answered softly. They will force you into a locked memory care facility. They will heavily medicate you just to keep you completely quiet and out of their way. And because you have been legally declared incompetent by a judge, no one will ever believe you when you try to tell them the absolute truth. Your own son is planning to bury you alive in a nursing home just to fund his wife's vanity and cover his own financial crimes. I sat frozen in the cold leather chair, letting the sheer, unadulterated evil of their plan settle deep into my tired bones. My own flesh and blood had calmly sat at a dinner table drinking expensive wine while drafting a legal strategy to permanently lock me in a psychiatric ward. They had laughed, they had smiled, and they had plotted my complete destruction without a single ounce of genuine remorse. The deep, agonizing grief that had been weighing down my chest for the past week suddenly evaporated completely. It did not fade away gently. It burned away, replaced entirely by something much darker and incredibly colder. I sat completely frozen in the heavy black leather chair in Victor's office, utterly paralyzed by the overwhelming weight of the horrifying truth I had just discovered. I closed my eyes, and for a fleeting moment I allowed myself to feel the profound, agonizing grief of a father who had just lost his only child. I remembered holding Jason when he was a newborn, making a silent promise to the universe that I would always protect him from the harsh realities of the world. I remembered teaching him how to ride a bicycle, cheering for him at his little league games, and paying for his college education so he would never have to struggle the way I did. I had spent 40 years building a fortress of financial security around him, and now he was using the very bricks of that fortress to build a prison for me. I felt a hot tear slide down my weathered cheek a final tribute to the son I thought I knew. But as I wiped that tear away, something fundamental shifted deep inside my chest. The crushing weight of the sorrow simply vanished. The warm, unconditional love that had blinded me for so long evaporated, leaving behind a cold vacuum. Into that space rushed a fierce rage unlike anything I had experienced in my 75 years. I opened my eyes and looked across the desk. Victor was already moving, his lawyer instincts fully activated by the sheer criminality of the documents sitting between us. He picked up his phone, his thumb hovering over the keypad. "Rick, we need to end this right now," Victor said, his voice clipped and entirely professional. "I will call the local precinct. We have clear documented evidence of a conspiracy to commit elder abuse, massive financial fraud, and extortion. We will have the police at their house within the hour. We can file an emergency injunctions to freeze all of their assets, including the house you paid for, and we will get a restraining order to protect you from any further contact. They belong in a jail cell, and I will personally make sure the district attorney throws the book at both of them." He started to dial, but I reached across the desk and firmly placed my hand over his. "No," I said, my voice shockingly calm. The steadiness of my own tone surprised me. It did not sound like an old man stabbed in the back. It sounded like the structural engineer I used to be evaluating a demolition project. Victor paused, looking at me with deep confusion. "Rick, you cannot be serious," he argued, pulling the phone slightly back. "You just read the petition. They are aggressively planning to declare you legally and mentally incompetent. They want to lock you in a psychiatric ward. You cannot show them any mercy. This is not the time to be a forgiving father." "I am not feeling forgiving, Victor," I replied slowly, pulling my hand back and sitting up straight in my chair. "But involving the police right now is the absolute worst thing we could do. Think about how the legal system actually works for people like them. If we call the police and file a massive lawsuit, what exactly happens? They will immediately hire a sleazy defense attorney. They will drag this out in the courts for years, and when the financial pressure finally becomes too much, Jason and Melanie will simply file for bankruptcy. They will legally wipe away all of their debts, including whatever they owe me. They might get a slap on the wrist, maybe some probation, but they will eventually just walk away. They will start over completely unbothered while my grandson is left with absolutely nothing." Victor slowly set the phone down on the desk, listening intently as my cold logic filled the room. "If we just sue them, they declare bankruptcy and walk away." I continued, my voice hardening into steel. "I do not want them to just walk away, Victor. I want them to feel exactly what I am feeling right now. I want them to experience the sheer terror of having their entire lives ripped away from them without warning. I want them to look around their pristine, luxurious colonial house and realize that every single inch of it is built on a massive lie. And most importantly, I want to make absolutely sure they can never, ever hurt Tyler or anyone else again." Victor leaned back in his chair, a slow, dark understanding spreading across his face. "So, what exactly are you proposing?" "We do," he asked cautiously. I pointed directly at the printed draft of the conservatorship petition lying on the desk. "We let them file the papers," I stated clearly. "We do not try to stop them. We do not give them any warning that we know about their plan. We let them walk right into the courthouse completely confident that they have outsmarted a clueless, declining old man. We are going to let them commit perjury on the public record in front of a sitting judge." Victor's eyes widened slightly as the sheer audacity of my plan began to sink in. "You want to walk straight into their trap," he clarified, tapping his pen rhythmically against the wooden desk. "No," I corrected him, a cold, humorless smile touching the corners of my mouth. "I want them to walk right directly into mine. They think they are the hunters in this scenario, Victor. They think I am just slow, weak, and oblivious to my surroundings. We are going to use their own arrogance completely against them. We are going to let them build their own gallows, tie their own noose, and step onto the trapdoor all by themselves. And when they are absolutely certain they have won, when they foolishly think my money is already sitting in their bank accounts, That is exactly when we are going to finally pull the heavy wooden lever. Leaving Victor's office, I drove straight to a high-end electronics store across town. I did not buy a cheap nanny cam. I purchased a state-of-the-art, ultra-high-definition, 4K hidden camera cleverly disguised as a standard digital clock. When I got home, I placed it directly on the mantel above the living room fireplace. I spent an hour adjusting the angle, making absolutely sure the wide lens captured the entire seating area, including the heavy leather armchair where I always sat, and the sofa opposite it. I tested the audio speaking in a low whisper from across the room, and the playback was crystal clear. Every single word spoken in that room would be perfectly preserved. With the trap meticulously set, I picked up my cell phone and dialed my son's number. I took a deep breath, deliberately slowing my heart rate, and let my voice go completely soft and slightly shaky. When Jason answered, he sounded guarded, likely expecting me to yell at him again for the extortion attempt. Instead, I sounded lost. "Jason," I murmured, letting a heavy sigh escape my lips. "I have been sitting here thinking. My head feels incredibly foggy today. I cannot quite remember why we argued the other night. You said you needed money for Tyler. Is he in some sort of trouble?" I could practically hear the gears turning in Jason's head through the phone. There was a brief pause followed by a sudden shift in his tone. He sounded incredibly eager, like a predator spotting a wounded animal. "Yes, Dad," he replied smoothly. "I told you there was a problem with his college deposit. It is a massive emergency." I paused for a long moment, pretending to struggle with my memory. "Well," I said quietly, "you had better come over then. I have my checkbook right here on the table." Jason arrived at my house less than 20 minutes later. The speed at which he drove over told me everything I needed to know about his desperation. When I opened the front door to let him in, I immediately put on an Oscar-worthy performance. I hunched my shoulders forward, shuffling my feet slightly against the hardwood floor. I let my hands tremble visibly as I reached out to close the heavy door behind him. I looked up at him with wide, uncertain eyes, completely masking the cold, calculating rage burning inside my chest. Jason stepped into the foyer, and I saw a brief, undeniable smirk flash across his face. He looked at my stooped posture and my shaking hands, and he completely bought the illusion. He truly believed his father was finally losing his mind. He followed me into the living room, taking a seat on the comfortable sofa, exactly where the hidden camera had a perfect, unobstructed view of his face. I lowered myself slowly into my leather armchair, letting out a weak groan. It took a moment for me to catch my breath, playing the part of a frail, exhausted old man perfectly. Jason leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, trying to look concerned, but failing to hide the greedy anticipation in his eyes. "Are you feeling okay, Dad?" he asked, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. "You seem really confused today." I rubbed my temples with shaking fingers. "I am just so tired, Jason," I whispered. "I cannot keep my thoughts straight. I remember you banging on the door in the rain, but the details are completely blurred. You said you needed $35,000. Is that right?" Jason nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, exactly. $35,000 to save Tyler's spot at the university." I slowly reached over to the side table and picked up my leather checkbook. I uncapped my pen, my hand violently shaking, as I hovered the tip over the paper. I wrote his name and then I stopped. I looked up at him, narrowing my eyes in fake confusion. "But Jason," I said slowly, dragging out the syllables. I remember looking at my ledgers. I already paid his tuition. "Why do you need this exact amount?" "Are you sure this is not for that woman at the club? What was her name again?" "Patricia." The color instantly drained from Jason's face. He froze, completely staring at me in absolute shock. For a terrifying second, I thought I had pushed the act too far and revealed my hand. But then the arrogance I was counting on completely took over. He looked at my trembling hands, my stooped shoulders, and my confused, blinking eyes. He convinced himself I was just having a brief, fragmented moment of clarity before slipping back into dementia. He let out a harsh, dismissive laugh, leaning back into the sofa cushions. He felt entirely safe in this room. He felt untouchable. "Look, Dad," he said, lowering his voice into a casual, conspiratorial tone. "Let us just be honest, since your memory is all over the place anyway. Yes, it is for Patricia. Melanie got involved in a bad private investment deal with some wealthy friends, and the guy completely vanished with their money. Patricia is threatening to go to the authorities and ruin our entire lives over a pathetic $35,000. If I do not pay her off by tomorrow morning, she is going to drag Melanie into federal court for wire fraud. The college deposit story was just the easiest way to get you to write the check without asking a million annoying questions. Tyler is not even in school right now, if you really must know." I nodded slowly, acting totally overwhelmed by this new information. I signed the paper check and handed it directly over. Jason snatched it greedily from my trembling fingers, patted my shoulder in a deeply patronizing manner, and briskly left the room. When the front door firmly clicked shut, I instantly sat up straight. I stood and walked straight to the mantel. "Got you. Got you," I whispered to the empty room. I walked to the mantel and retrieved the digital clock. My hands were no longer shaking. The frail old man act vanished the moment my son walked out the door. I connected the hidden camera to my laptop and reviewed the footage. The audio clearly recorded his arrogant confession. He admitted the college deposit story was a fabrication, that my grandson was not even in school, and the $35,000 was hush money to stop a wire fraud investigation. He had handed me the rope I needed to hang him. I encrypted the file and sent it directly to Victor. Later that afternoon, Tyler texted me from the driveway of their house. Jason returned home in a celebratory mood. Melanie cheered in the kitchen. They popped champagne, convinced they had manipulated their declining father and solved their crisis. They thought they were safe. They had no idea the check they were celebrating was just bait for a much larger trap. The next morning, I sat across from Victor in his office. We had the video evidence to destroy their conservatorship petition, but I wanted more than a successful defense. I wanted to completely dismantle their fake empire. I wanted to take away the very thing they valued most. "Victor," I said, leaning forward and resting my forearms on the glass desk, "when they file those papers to declare me incompetent, they are going to try and take my house. I want to take theirs first." Victor smiled a genuine predatory grin that did not quite reach his cold gray eyes. "I was hoping you would say that, Rick," he replied. "Sarah has been digging into the specifics of that predatory second mortgage they took out. The private lender they used is a notoriously shady financial group that specializes in high-risk loans. But right now, the commercial real estate market is getting incredibly tight, and lenders like them are desperate for immediate liquid capital. They are actively looking to offload their riskier residential debt portfolios." I nodded, following his logic perfectly. "How do we use that to our advantage?" I asked. Victor opened a fresh legal pad and uncapped his silver pen. "We do not approach them as Rick Dawson, the angry father," Victor explained. "We approach them as a faceless corporate entity. I will draft the paperwork right now to establish a completely anonymous, limited liability company based out of Delaware. Your name will not appear on any public registry associated with this company. We will name it something generic like Apex Holdings LLC. Once the company is legally established," Victor continued, "you are going to wire the necessary funds from your retirement portfolio directly into the corporate account of Apex Holdings. Then, acting as the legal representative for this new company, I will personally contact the private lender holding your son's second mortgage. I will make them an offer they cannot refuse. I will offer to buy the debt in full in cold cash. For a shady lender desperate for liquidity, it will be an absolute no-brainer. They will sell the debt to us without a second thought." My heart began to beat with a steady rhythm. "And once Apex Holdings buys that debt," I clarified, staring intently at the lawyer, What exactly does that mean for Jason and Melanie? Victor leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers together. It means, Rick, that you become their direct legal creditor. You will entirely own the second mortgage on their luxury colonial home. Every single month when they struggle to make that massive high-interest payment, they will secretly be paying you. And more importantly, if they miss a single payment or if they violate the strict terms of the original loan agreement, Apex Holdings will have the absolute right to foreclose on the property. You will hold the deed to the roof over their heads, and they will not have the slightest clue until you decide to drop the hammer. Do it, I said, without a single moment of hesitation. Start the paperwork immediately. The next 48 hours were a blur of intense legal and financial maneuvering. I authorized the massive transfer of funds from my secure retirement accounts to the newly formed Delaware Corporation. He moved with incredible speed and ruthless efficiency. He contacted the shady private lending firm, representing himself as an aggressive corporate buyer looking to acquire high-yield residential debt. Just as he predicted, the lender was thrilled to offload the risky mortgage for a massive cash buyout. The negotiations were completed in less than an afternoon. 3 days later, I was back in Victor's office. The heavy wooden desk was cleared of everything except a single thick stack of legal documents. Victor picked up the top file and handed it across the desk to me. I took the heavy paper in my hands. It was the official transfer of debt. The signature from the original lender was clearly stamped at the bottom. I looked down at the documents, a profound sense of absolute power washing over me. The $200,000 down payment I had given them out of love had been twisted by their greed into a massive liability. Now, using their reckless actions against them, I had secretly bought that liability. I own the very walls that surround them. I own the very floors they walk on. While they were sipping champagne and drafting legal documents to lock me away in a secure psychiatric facility, I had quietly purchased the very ground beneath their feet. They thought they were the architects of my destruction, but they had simply built their own financial prison and blindly handed me the only key. The shadow buyout was officially complete. The trap was perfectly set. All I had to do now was wait patiently for my arrogant son to finally file that ridiculous conservatorship petition and trigger his own absolute ruin. I did not have to wait very long. 2 days after the shadow buyout was finalized, the trap was officially sprung. It was a quiet Tuesday morning. I was sitting on my front porch drinking a cup of black coffee and watching the neighborhood wake up when a plain white sedan pulled into my driveway. A man wearing a cheap gray suit stepped out carrying a thick manila envelope. He walked up the concrete path with the tired, purposeful stride of a man who delivered bad news for a living. "Are you Rick Dawson?" he asked, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps. I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling the heat radiate through my chest. "I am," I replied calmly. He walked up the steps, handed me the heavy envelope, and simply said, "You have been served." He turned and walked back to his car without another word. I sat the coffee mug down on the wooden railing and broke the seal on the envelope. Even though I knew exactly what was inside, seeing the official seal of the county court stamped in dark blue ink sent a sudden sharp chill down my spine. It was the formal summons for an emergency conservatorship hearing. Jason had actually done it. My own son had legally sworn under penalty of perjury that I was a danger to myself and completely incapable of managing my own life. The hearing was scheduled for the very next morning at 9 o'clock. They had filed for an emergency expedited process, hoping to catch me completely off guard before I could hire adequate legal representation. I picked up my phone and immediately called Victor. "The documents just arrived," I told him, tracing the raised seal on the paper with my thumb. "The hearing is tomorrow morning." Victor did not sound surprised at all. "Excellent," he replied, the sound of keyboard typing echoing in the background. "I already have all of our exhibits prepared and neatly indexed. The medical evaluations from the 3 independent neurologists came back perfectly clean. They clearly state that your cognitive function is exceptionally high. I have the bank records proving their massive financial fraud, and I have the encrypted video file of Jason confessing to the hush money scheme loaded onto a secure tablet. They think they are walking into a simple administrative hearing to quietly take your rights away. They have absolutely no idea they are walking into a legal slaughterhouse. I thanked Victor and hung up the phone. The rest of the day felt incredibly surreal. I walked through the quiet rooms of my house looking at the framed photographs on the walls. Pictures of Jason as a little boy, pictures of our family vacations, pictures of a life that felt like it belonged to a completely different lifetime. I felt a profound sense of mourning, not for the son who was trying to destroy me, but for the son I had already lost to greed. But that mourning was quickly replaced by a fierce protective instinct. I was not just fighting for my own freedom tomorrow. I was fighting for my grandson. And that evening, just as the sun was setting, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It was a message from Tyler. The text was brief and urgent. They are drinking heavily again, celebrating because they think they have already won. I cannot stay in this house anymore. I am packing my bags right now. I felt a surge of adrenaline. I quickly typed back telling him to be extremely careful and to let me know the second he was out the door. The next 2 hours were agonizing. I sat in the dark living room staring out the front window, waiting for any sign of him. I knew the risk he was taking. If Jason caught him leaving, the confrontation would be explosive. Finally, just past midnight, a set of headlights turned onto my street. An old beat-up taxicab pulled to a stop at the end of my driveway. The back door swung open, and Tyler stepped out into the cool night air. He was carrying a heavy canvas duffel bag over one shoulder and a worn-out backpack strapped to his chest. He looked exhausted, but as he walked toward the house, his posture was remarkably straight. He was no longer the broken boy I found crying under a rusted truck in a greasy mechanic shop. He was a young man making a conscious choice to completely sever ties with the toxic people who had ruined his life. I opened the front door before he even reached the porch. He walked inside, dropping his heavy bags onto the hardwood floor with a dull thud. We did not say anything at first. We simply embraced. It was a tight, fierce hug that communicated everything words could not. "I am so proud of you, Tyler," I whispered, patting his back. He pulled away, looking me directly in the eyes. I grabbed everything I could. "Grandpa," he said, his voice steady and resolute. My birth certificate, my social security card, and all the original photographs of their financial documents. I left my house keys on the kitchen counter. "I am never going back there. You do not ever have to go back," I promised him. "Your room is ready upstairs. Get some sleep. Tomorrow is going to be a very long day." Tyler nodded, picking up his bags and heading up the wooden staircase. I stayed downstairs, walking back into the living room. I looked at the digital clock on the mantel, the very same hidden camera that had recorded my son's fatal mistake. The battle lines were officially drawn. Tyler was safe under my roof, the shadow company owned their mortgage, and the legal trap was primed and ready to snap shut. I sat down in my leather armchair and waited for the dawn. Tomorrow morning we were going to the county courthouse. The morning sun cast long, cold shadows across the stone steps of the county courthouse. I walked through the heavy glass doors with Victor by my side, my posture intentionally slightly stooped. Tyler was safely tucked away in a private witness waiting room down the long marble hallway, completely out of sight from his parents. As we pushed open the thick wooden doors of courtroom number 4, the heavy silence of the room wrapped around us. Jason and Melanie were already seated at the petitioner table. They had dressed perfectly for the occasion. Jason wore a modest, dark gray suit that made him look responsible and heavily burdened by sorrow. Melanie had tied her blonde hair back in a simple, understated style, wearing a plain beige blouse that completely hid her usual country club glamour. They were the absolute picture of a grieving, deeply concerned family forced into making a heartbreaking decision. When we took our seats at the defense table, Jason briefly glanced over at me. He offered a tight, sympathetic smile that made my stomach churn with pure disgust. He was fully committed to his role as the reluctant savior. A few minutes later, the bailiff announced the arrival of the judge. She was a stern-looking woman with silver hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. She took her seat at the high wooden bench, adjusted her reading glasses, and opened the thick file containing Jason's petition. The emergency hearing officially began. Victor sat silently beside me, his hands resting calmly on the table, offering no immediate objections, as the opposing counsel called Jason to the stand. Jason walked slowly to the witness box, placing his right hand on the Bible and swearing to tell the whole truth. He sat down looking exhausted and profoundly sad. His lawyer began asking gentle, guiding questions about my recent behavior. Jason took a deep, shaky breath before he answered. "Your Honor." He began, his voice cracking with perfectly rehearsed emotion. "This is the hardest thing I have ever had to do. I love my father more than anything in this world. He worked so hard his entire life to provide for us, but over the last few months, the man who raised me has slowly slipped away." He paused dramatically, wiping a completely imaginary tear from the corner of his eye. Jason then launched directly into the fabricated story about the graduation party. He described in vivid, agonizing detail how I had shown up at his empty house completely disoriented and deeply confused. He told the judge that he had sent me multiple reminders, called me the week before, and even sat down with me to discuss the venue change. He claimed that when I arrived on his porch, I did not know what day it was or why the house was empty. He painted a tragic picture of an old man wandering aimlessly, rapidly, losing his grip on reality. I sat there listening to my own son commit perjury, with a completely straight face, marveling at the absolute ease with which he lied. He sounded so incredibly sincere that if I had not lived the actual truth myself, I might have actually believed his performance. The judge listened intently, her stern expression softening into a look of deep, professional pity. She took careful notes, occasionally looking over the rim of her glasses at me with a sad, sympathetic gaze. Then it was Melanie's turn to speak. She did not even need to take the stand to make a massive impact. From her seat at the table, she began to quietly sob into a white tissue. When the judge gently asked if she wanted to add anything to the sworn testimony, Melanie stood up, her voice trembling violently. "Your Honor," she pleaded, clutching the tissue tightly to her chest. "We are just so incredibly terrified for his physical safety. He is living all alone in that big, empty house. He constantly forgets to lock the doors at night. He forgets to turn off the kitchen stove. And the financial decisions he has been making recently are absolutely terrifying. He has been giving away massive amounts of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars, to absolute strangers. We have tried everything we can to protect him, but he gets so angry and horribly confused when we try to step in. We just want to keep him safe before he completely ruins the legacy he worked so hard to build." The sheer audacity of her prepared statement was breathtaking. She was openly sitting in a court of law, crying fake tears and actively blaming me for the $380,000 she had personally squandered on luxury cars and country club dues. She was taking her own massive financial crimes and projecting them entirely onto me, utilizing my past generosity as the primary evidence of my supposed dementia. It was a terrifying masterclass in psychological manipulation. I kept my head slightly bowed, staring down at my wrinkled hands playing the part of the broken, defeated old man. I did not react to her disgusting lies. I did not shout or demand to be heard. I simply let them build their beautiful, towering house of cards right there in the middle of the quiet courtroom. The judge let out a heavy sigh, clearly moved by their convincing, emotional performance. She looked down at the thick petition file, her mind seemingly already made up. The trap was working flawlessly. Jason leaned back in his wooden chair, stealing a quick, triumphant glance at his weeping wife. He truly thought the battle was completely over. He thought he had successfully stolen my freedom, my finances, and my future without breaking a sweat. He had absolutely no idea that the silent lawyer sitting next to me was currently holding the detonator to his existence. The quiet courtroom remained perfectly still as the judge reached for her wooden gavel, ready to finalize the grand tragedy. The trap snapped. The meticulously planned trap finally snapped. Victor slowly pushed his chair back, the heavy wooden legs scraping loudly against the polished floor. He stood up to his full height, buttoning his suit jacket with a chilling, practiced calm. Jason had just finished his tearful performance, a smug look of absolute triumph hidden just beneath his sorrowful mask. He thought he had already crossed the finish line. He thought the gavel was about to fall in his favor. But as Victor stepped out from behind our table, the entire atmosphere in the courtroom instantly shifted. The air grew heavy, thick with the sudden sharp tension of a predator finally revealing its teeth. "Your Honor, Victor," began his voice, completely devoid of any warmth or sympathy. It boomed through the quiet room, crisp and authoritative. "We have no desire to cross-examine this witness regarding his deeply emotional testimony. Instead, we would like to present the court with concrete, undeniable medical evidence that directly contradicts every single word the petitioner just spoke under oath." The judge frowned slightly, her pen hovering over her notepad. She looked at Victor with a mixture of professional curiosity and mild irritation. "Counsel," she said firmly, "the petitioner has presented a highly concerning narrative regarding your client's severe mental decline. If you have medical records to submit, approach the bench." Victor did not just approach the bench. He marched toward it with the absolute certainty of a man holding a royal flush. From his sleek leather briefcase, he produced 3 thick, perfectly bound medical folders. He did not hand them to the bailiff. He placed them directly onto the raised wooden surface of the judge's desk, with a heavy resounding thud that echoed throughout the silent room. "What you are looking at, Your Honor," Victor stated clearly, turning slightly, so Jason and Melanie could hear every single syllable, "are 3 comprehensive psychiatric and neurological evaluations. These are not brief checkups from a general practitioner. These are exhaustive multi-day cognitive assessments conducted by 3 of the most highly respected, board-certified neurologists in this entire state, and they were all completed within the last 72 hours. Jason shifted incredibly uncomfortably in the heavy wooden witness box. I kept my head down, but I could see his hands tightly gripping the wooden rail. Melanie stopped dabbing her dry eyes with her tissue. The fake tears instantly vanished, replaced by a look of sudden gripping panic. The judge adjusted her reading glasses and opened the first folder. The courtroom was so incredibly quiet that I could hear the crisp sound of the heavy paper turning. She read the first page, her brow furrowed in deep concentration. Then she flipped to the second page. Her eyes darted rapidly across the dense medical jargon. The soft, sympathetic pity that had previously warmed her face began to rapidly evaporate. It was replaced first by deep confusion, and then by a cold, hard realization. She closed the first folder, opened the second, and then quickly opened the third, comparing the final conclusions of all 3 independent specialists. The silence stretched on for what felt like an absolute eternity. I watched the judge's knuckles turn white as she gripped the edges of the medical reports. When she finally looked up, her gaze was completely transformed. She did not look at me with pity anymore. She looked directly at Jason across the room, and her eyes were burning intensely with a fierce, terrifying judicial anger. "Mr. Dawson," the judge said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register that made the entire room hold its breath. "You just sat in my courtroom, placed your hand on a Bible, and swore under the penalty of perjury that your father was suffering from advanced, debilitating dementia. You claimed he was hallucinating, wandering aimlessly, and incapable of understanding basic reality." Jason swallowed hard, his throat bobbing nervously. "Yes, Your Honor," he squeaked, his confident facade completely crumbling. "That is exactly what we have been witnessing." The judge picked up the first medical report and held it up in the air. Then you must have a completely different definition of reality than the top medical experts in this country, she snapped, her voice cracking like a whip. Because according to Dr. Aris Thorne, the chief of neurology at the State Medical Center, your father does not have dementia. In fact, Dr. Thorne explicitly states that your father's cognitive function, memory retention, and spatial awareness are not just normal. They are testing in the top 1% for a man of his age. The remaining color completely drained from Jason's normally confident face. He looked like a man who had just stepped off a cliff and was frantically waiting for the ground to hit him. But Your Honor. Jason stammered, desperately gripping the wooden rail. He forgot the graduation party. We had to cancel it. He showed up at an empty house. He was totally lost. The incredibly furious judge slammed the medical file hard down onto her massive desk. The loud crack echoed like a gunshot. Do not insult my intelligence, she warned, her eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. I have 3 separate, highly detailed evaluations confirming that this man has the mental acuity of someone 20 years his junior. There is absolutely no medical evidence of cognitive decline, memory loss, or dissociative episodes. These doctors subjected him to rigorous memory tests, logic puzzles, and psychological profiling. He passed every single one with flawless precision. So someone in this courtroom is telling me a massive calculated lie, and based on the undeniable medical evidence sitting right here on my desk. That person is you. Jason opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked wildly at his own lawyer, who was currently staring down at his blank legal pad, actively trying to physically distance himself from his own client. The trap was not just beautifully sprung. It had completely shattered their entire false narrative forever. Victor stood tall, his presence dominating the silent courtroom. Your Honor, Victor said, his voice slicing through the tension. Medical reports only prove that my client is of sound mind. They do not fully explain why the petitioner would go to such lengths to lie under oath. To provide the court with the full context of this malicious petition, I request permission to enter Exhibit B into the official record. It is a time-stamped video recording from my client's living room taken just 4 days ago. The judge gave a sharp nod. Proceed. Victor handed the bailiff a digital tablet. The bailiff connected it to the large monitor on the courtroom wall. The screen flickered to life, showing the hidden camera angle from my mantel. There I was, sitting in my leather armchair, performing my role perfectly hunched over and trembling. Then Jason walked into the frame. The audio was clear. They heard him admit that the story about Tyler losing his college deposit was a fabrication. They heard him confess that the $35,000 he was extorting from me was hush money to pay off an angry investor. They heard him laugh as he snatched the check, dismissing my cognitive decline as a convenient tool for his financial gain. As the video played, the color drained from Jason's face, replaced by a gray. He looked like he was going to be sick at the petitioner table. Melanie buried her face in her hands, her shoulders trembling violently. But this time there were no fake tears. She was shaking with terror. The judge stared at the screen, her jaw set so tightly that a muscle twitched in her cheek. When the video ended and the screen went black, the silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was the heavy, suffocating silence that follows an explosion. Your Honor, Victor continued, his voice making Jason flinch. The petitioner did not file this conservatorship because he was worried about his father's health. He filed it because he and his wife squandered $400,000 of my client's money to fund a lavish lifestyle. They took out second mortgages, funded investment schemes, and drained the educational trust meant for their son. They are desperate and intended to lock a healthy man in a psychiatric ward just to gain access to his retirement portfolio. The judge looked furious. She opened her mouth to speak, but Victor raised his hand. We have one final witness, Your Honor, Victor said softly, just to ensure there is absolutely no doubt about the true victims of this incredible fraud. I call Tyler to the stand. Jason's head snapped up so fast I thought he might break his neck. Melanie gasped audibly, dropping her hands in shock. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom slowly opened, and my grandson walked down the center aisle. He was not wearing a greasy mechanic uniform today. He wore a clean button-down shirt and slacks. He walked with his head held high, ignoring the pleading looks his parents threw at him as he passed their table. He stepped confidently into the witness box, swore the required oath, and sat down. Tyler Victor said, gently approaching the stand, "Can you please tell the court why you are not currently attending your freshman year of college?" Tyler took a deep breath, looking directly at the judge. "Because I did not graduate high school, Your Honor." Tyler said, his voice clear. "I was expelled 6 months ago because my parents stopped paying the tuition. My grandfather gave them $180,000 for my education. But they spent it on luxury cars, country club memberships, and fake investments. When the school kicked me out, my parents lied to my grandfather, claiming I had a panic attack to explain why there was no graduation party. Then they lied to me, telling me my grandfather had cut us off to go on luxury vacations. They forced me to work as a mechanic in a garage just to help them pay their hidden debts." The courtroom was captivated by the heartbreaking testimony of a young man whose future had been stolen by his own parents. Tyler did not stop there. He detailed how he had sneaked into his father's home office late at night. He described finding the drafted legal documents and the medical brochures about advanced dementia. He explained how his parents would sit at the dinner table drinking expensive wine, laughing about how easily they were going to declare my grandfather incompetent so they could steal his house and pay off their wealthy friends. The judge had heard enough. She literally threw her silver pen down onto her desk. It clattered loudly against the polished wood. "Mr. Dawson," she barked, her voice echoing with righteous judicial fury as she glared directly at Jason. "In my 20 years on the bench, I have rarely seen a display of such calculated malicious greed. You have not only committed blatant perjury in my courtroom, but you have actively conspired to commit severe elder abuse, massive financial fraud, and extortion. You weaponized the legal system to try and destroy your own father and steal your son's future." She picked up her heavy wooden gavel, her hand shaking with anger. "This petition for conservatorship is denied with extreme prejudice," she declared, slamming the gavel down with a deafening crack. "Furthermore, I am formally ordering the bailiff to immediately impound all exhibits presented here today. I am forwarding the entire official transcript of this hearing, along with the video evidence and the medical evaluations, directly to the district attorney. I strongly recommend they press criminal charges against both you and your wife for perjury, attempted fraud, and criminal conspiracy. You tried to bury your father today, Mr. Dawson, but you only succeeded in digging your own grave. Get out of my courtroom before I hold you in contempt and have you arrested right now." The heavy wooden doors of the courtroom swung open violently as Jason and Melanie stumbled out into the expansive marble hallway. They were moving blindly, their bodies physically shaking with the shock of their complete and utter destruction. I walked out a few moments later, my stride steady and calm, flanked perfectly by Victor on my left and my grandson Tyler on my right. The air in the corridor was thick with the suffocating panic radiating from my son and his wife. Melanie had collapsed onto a wooden bench near the elevators, her face buried in her trembling hands, loudly hyperventilating as the terrifying reality of impending criminal charges finally crushed her manufactured reality. Jason was pacing erratically back and forth across the polished stone floor, running his hands aggressively through his perfectly styled hair, his tailored gray suit now looking entirely like a costume he had completely outgrown. When he saw me step through the doorway, his erratic pacing stopped. He stared at me with wide, panicked eyes, the arrogant predator now reduced entirely to a terrified, cornered animal. He practically sprinted across the hallway, closing the distance between us, his hands raised in a desperate, trembling gesture of surrender. "Dad." "Please," Jason choked out, his voice a pathetic, high-pitched whine that echoed loudly off the marble walls. "You have to listen to me. Please just wait a second. I never wanted any of this to happen. I swear to you, I was just so incredibly desperate. Patricia was going to call the federal authorities, and Melanie was going to go to federal prison, and I completely panicked. I lost my mind. I never actually wanted to hurt you or put you in a home. It was just the only legal way I would think of to access the money quickly to save my family. You have to believe me, Dad. I am your son. You cannot let them send me to prison. You have to call the district attorney and tell them it was all just a massive misunderstanding. We can fix this. I will pay you back every single penny. I swear on my life. I stopped walking and stood perfectly still, looking at the sweating, pathetic man standing in front of me. I did not raise my voice. I did not shout or curse or clench my fists. I felt absolutely nothing for him. The profound, heartbreaking grief I had felt earlier that morning had completely burned itself out, leaving behind a smooth, impenetrable surface of pure, cold indifference. You do not have a family to save anymore, Jason, I said quietly, my voice echoing with a chilling finality. You completely destroyed your own family the second you decided to sacrifice your son's future and lock your own father in a psychiatric ward just to cover your own pathetic greed. You made your choices with absolute clarity, and now you are going to live with the permanent consequences. But we have absolutely nothing left, Jason sobbed, his face crumbling into a mask of pure terror. If the district attorney presses charges, the legal fees will completely bankrupt us. The bank will take the house. We will be homeless, Dad. We will be completely out on the street. Please, you have to help us. Just one last time. I reached slowly inside the inner breast pocket of my tailored suit jacket. I did not pull out a checkbook. I did not pull out a handkerchief to wipe away his tears. I calmly pulled out a thick, legally binding document folded neatly in thirds. I smoothed the paper out with my thumb and index finger and held it out directly toward him. Jason stared at the document, his bloodshot eyes darting back and forth in complete confusion. He reached out with a trembling hand and took the heavy paper from my grasp. He looked down at the bold black text printed at the very top of the page. It was an official, legally executed notice of foreclosure. What is this? Jason whispered, his voice trembling so violently he could barely form the words. He read the name of the holding company listed as the primary creditor. Apex Holdings. Why are you handing me a foreclosure notice from a corporate holding company? I took a deliberate step closer to him, lowering my voice so that only he, Victor, and Tyler could hear my absolute final judgment. Do you remember when your shady private lender suddenly sold your predatory second mortgage last month? I asked, my tone as sharp and completely unforgiving as shattered glass. You thought you caught a lucky break when a faceless corporate entity from Delaware bought your massive debt. You thought it bought you a few extra weeks of breathing room. Well, Jason, I am Apex Holdings. I created that shadow company. I took the money you tried so desperately to steal from my retirement portfolio, and I legally purchased the massive debt you recklessly created. I own the second mortgage on your luxury colonial home. You missed your first mandatory payment to the new holding company 48 hours ago because you were entirely too busy drafting fake legal documents to declare me incompetent and steal the rest of my life. Jason stopped breathing. The heavy paper shook violently in his pale hands. You missed the payment, I repeated. And according to the strict terms of your loan, missing a single payment gives me the unquestionable right to execute a full foreclosure. So while you were sitting in that courtroom trying to take my house, I officially took yours. You and your wife have exactly 7 days to vacate my property completely. Melanie let out a piercing, hysterical shriek, collapsing onto the marble floor. I did not offer a single word of comfort. Come on, Tyler, I said gently, and patted his shoulder. Let us go home. We left them completely broken and weeping on the floor, walking proudly into the bright, warm sunlight. The drive home from the courthouse that afternoon was the quietest, most peaceful journey of my entire life. Tyler sat in the passenger seat staring out the window, watching the city blur past us. For the first time in months, the heavy tension that had gripped his young shoulders was completely gone. We did not need to speak. The silence was a shared victory, a mutual acknowledgement that the nightmare was finally over. We ordered a massive pizza that evening, sat on the back porch, and watched the stars come out. I felt like I could finally breathe again. But the legal machinery we had set in motion that morning was just beginning its relentless work. Fast forward 6 months, and the landscape of our lives looks entirely different. The district attorney did not take the judge's recommendation lightly. Within a week of our courtroom showdown, federal investigators knocked on Jason's door. They aggressively audited his bank accounts, interviewed the furious country club investors, and completely unraveled the massive web of deceit he had woven. Today, my son is currently sitting in a county holding cell awaiting trial on multiple federal charges, including wire fraud, criminal conspiracy, and attempted extortion. His high-priced defense attorney dropped him the moment the retainer check bounced. The man who tried to strip away my freedom is now facing a very real, very long federal prison sentence. He writes me letters sometimes begging for forgiveness, pleading for me to post his massive bail. I return every single one of them completely unopened. He made his bed, and now he has to lie in it. As for Melanie, her loyalty lasted exactly as long as the money did. The moment the foreclosure notice became public record and the federal investigators started asking uncomfortable questions, she packed her expensive designer bags and immediately fled the state. She filed for divorce from a safe distance, citing irreconcilable differences, and moved across the country to live in her sister's cramped basement. She completely abandoned Jason to face the criminal charges entirely alone, and she has not made a single phone call to check on her own son. Her vanity was her entire identity, and without my retirement funds to actively support it, she simply ceased to exist in our world. Good riddance. Taking back the house was a surprisingly swift process. When the 7-day eviction notice finally expired, I hired a private security firm to safely oversee their immediate departure. They left behind a house completely full of expensive, totally useless junk. I hired a professional cleaning crew, staged the property, and immediately put the luxury colonial home on the open market. Because the real estate market in that specific upscale neighborhood was heavily booming, the house sold in less than 3 weeks for well over our initial asking price. As the primary legal creditor through my shadow company Apex Holdings, I swiftly recouped every single penny of the massive second mortgage they had secretly taken out. I successfully recovered the initial down payment, the stolen tuition money, and enough extra equity to comfortably cover all of my expensive legal fees with Victor. The financial black hole they had desperately tried to dig for me had been completely filled, and my retirement portfolio was entirely whole once again. But the absolute greatest victory of all does not reside in my bank account. It lives upstairs in the spare bedroom of my quiet home. Living in a stable, honest environment completely transformed Tyler. Without the toxic daily manipulation of his parents weighing him down, his natural brilliance and deep ambition quickly returned. We hired a dedicated private tutor, and he worked tirelessly day and night to complete his missing high school credits. He proudly earned his diploma with honors just 2 months ago. Today, he is officially enrolled as a full-time freshman at a highly respected state university, passionately studying mechanical engineering. He wants to build strong, lasting things, just like his grandfather. To ensure his bright future is never jeopardized again, Victor and I established a new ironclad trust fund. The money is legally secured behind heavy layers of corporate protection that neither Jason nor Melanie can ever touch, even if they somehow manage to avoid federal prison. The educational funds are dispersed directly to the university billing department, and Tyler receives a modest, highly manageable monthly stipend for his basic living expenses. He visits me every single weekend, and the wonderful sound of his genuine laughter fills my house once again. He is safe, he is happy, and he is finally free to live his own beautiful life. We sit together on Sunday mornings drinking coffee and talking about his complicated engineering classes. He tells me about his new friends, his challenging professors, and his big plans for the future. Looking at him now confident and smiling, I know that every difficult decision I made was absolutely necessary. It was brutal, it was painful, and it tested the very limits of my own sanity, but I would do it all over again in a heartbeat to protect this remarkable young man. Life has a funny way of stripping away the things you thought you needed, only to leave you with the things that truly matter. I lost a son to the dark depths of human greed, but I gained a grandson, and I managed to keep my own soul intact. The bridges I spent my whole life building out of steel and concrete will eventually rust and fall apart. But the foundation I rebuilt for my family is going to stand the test of time. Blood doesn't make you family. Loyalty does. I had to destroy my son to save my grandson and my own dignity. Where are you watching this story from? Do you think I went too far, or did they get exactly what they deserved? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to support this old man's channel.